Good afternoon. So I first give an overview from pediatric urologist perspective, especially from the urodynamic perspective regarding the neurogenic bladder, posterior urethral valve, bladder atrophy, anorectal malformation. It's well known that these four abnormalities is very popular in the pediatric clinical practice. All this disease related to the bladder dysfunction before or after procedure, operation, or before or after they come to the hospital. So regarding the bladder dysfunction, we must mention the urodynamic study. So no urodynamic study, we cannot give the evidence of the bladder detrusor dysfunction and the sphincter dysfunction. Actually, in children, urodynamic study is easy to perform. So this figure mainly show how to perform the cystometry by insert the catheter, one catheter pressure into the bladder and one monitor abdominal pressure by the rectum catheter. Not only measurement the detrusor pressure by cystometry, we also can use the synchronous bladder and the urethral pressure measurement at the same time. So we can monitor the urethral instability. During the filling phase, we can see the urethral pressure decreased. This also can induce the bladder dysfunction or voiding dysfunction symptoms. This catheter show how to measure the urethral pressure. So we use this catheter fixer to fix the urethral catheter and keep the catheter stable during the bladder pressure measurement. The most important is the video urodynamic study. So we can not only get the detrusor pressure, but also we can get information about the morphology, ureteral fluxes, bladder neck, open or not, a lot of information. So from this urodynamic point, so we just overview this four abnormalities. One is the neurogenic bladder. In children, it's well known most of the neurogenic bladder is due to the spinal abnormalities. For example, the spinal bifida or mononucleus. So this result in the bladder dysfunction. In the clinical practice, we know the spinal level and the extent of congenital lesion are poorly correlated with the clinical outcome. Therefore, the urodynamic study is most valuable for defend or determine the extent of the voiding pathophysiology. So this also the figure show how to measure the detrusor pressure, abdominal pressure, urethral flow, and sphincter. From the EAU outline, so for the urodynamic investigation, it's necessary to document the function of lower urinary tract dysfunction. So that for this neurogenic bladder, so that's most important indication for the urodynamic study. First is a non-invasive test. If we find something wrong with the bladder, for example, increase the residuals, so we must recommend the video urodynamic study. So the urodynamic study, most important parameter, including the bladder capacity and also the filling pressure, especially before the voiding, the end of filling pressure is most important to protect the renal function. Usually it's less than 40 centimeter waters, intravascular pressure, and the flux, the detrusor activity under overactivity or underactivity. That's most important. Also, we need to determine the sphincter mechanism. The degree of coordination between the torso and the sphincter. This biodynamic study, we can easily to make a diagnosis. Also, the volume pattern, post-volume residual urine is most important. Video urodynamic study give us information about the reflux. So from the urodynamic study, we can catalog the type of the bladder dysfunction. So for the detorsor, you may find the overactive detorsor, also underactive detorsor, or normal detorsor function. Sometimes you may find the urethral function instability, overactivity, or underactivity, or normal. So we make a different type of the bladder and the urethral function. So from this figure, you can see the neurogenic bladder. The detorsor is underactive. So during the voiding, you cannot find the detorsor contraction. The children voided by abdominal pressure, increased abdominal pressure. So this from the video urodynamic study, you can see the morphology of the bladder. You can see the bladder wall is good for these cases. So after the urodynamic study, we can easily find a way, the different of bladder function, we can choose different treatment modality. Most of cases, if they show overactive bladder, probably you can use anticholinergic drug, the medicine. Some detorsor sphincter weakness, you can use the electrical stimulation. Some difficulty, voiding difficulty, can use the CSE. Most of young children actually need toilet training. Conservative treatment, you can improve the bladder voiding. Only the very small bladder need surgical procedures to enlarge the bladder capacity. About the urethral, posterior urethral valve. So this actually have 3 types of posterior urethral valves. This is in the United States, the information per 1,000 newborn probably have 1 cases of posterior urethral valves. So type 1, that's most common types. 95% of them show voiding dysfunction or obstruction, urethral obstruction. Type 3 is small, also show voiding obstruction, but type 2 is very rarely seen. Even in the baby, in the fetus, you can make a diagnosis by ultrasound because the bladder is become large and you can depress the pressure of the bladder by fetus, your fetus. So the diagnosis is easy for POF syndrome because you usually see both kidney dilatation and urethral reflux. Also from this video cystography, you can see the urethral bladder neck is dilated. This easily take the procedure. Most important is the video urodynamic study shall be followed the patient even after the procedure because before the procedure, most of the patients already show the bladder dysfunction. A detorsor also have underactivity or abnormalities. So the follow-up is most important. Can give the patient in time the guideline how to treat or continue improve the bladder function. So this 1 case is just show the follow-up by video urodynamic study. This 1 case is from Africa. Actually, his father worked in China, so he come to my center to follow up after the surgical treatment, continually follow to see, detect the bladder function. The third condition is the bladder atrophy. So this in clinical not common, but it's a very important disease because after the birth, you can make a diagnosis because the abdominal wall and is a defect, and the bladder, the mucosa is exposed. You can see it connected to the abdominal wall, you must close it. After close, the urodynamic study is important for continually assessment the bladder development in the future, including monitor the bladder capacity, discharge pressure, and during the follow-up, urodynamic study can give us a lot of information about the bladder dysfunction, what kind of dysfunction can tell us use the medicine or give more treatment procedures. So follow the bladder neck reconstruction urodynamic study provide the objective correlation between the clinical symptoms and the continence, and also give our mechanism of the bladder dysfunction. This just shows some cases we follow up. We can easily make diagnosis video urodynamic to see the pressure measurement. Finally, abnormalities is in the infants is anorectal malformations, because these cases involve distal anus and rectum as well as the urinary genital tract. Also, many cases, same time with renal agenesis, refluxes, uninhibited discharge contraction, poor compliance, a lot of problem with the bladder function or lower urinary tract dysfunction. So after the surgical procedures, the cases also need reconstruction the bladder and the urethra. So the bladder and the urethra volume function is most important to monitor in the future, especially with the video or urodynamics. So early and repeated urodynamic evaluation is very important to detect the earliest as possible the deterioration of before invisible neurologic damage has occurred. Also, in these cases, usually also the cases show the spinal occluder. So also, that means some most of cases with a neurogenic bladder. So your dynamic study is very important. Before procedure, not so important, but after the procedure, you must use your dynamic to follow them, to give more treatment information for patient, also for doctor. So give a summary. In my overview, the four disease, neurogenic bladder, posterior urethral valve syndrome, ectrophy, bladder ectrophy, and anorectal malformation are very common in pediatric urological practice. So your dynamic study is important in diagnosing the bladder dysfunction, especially the detrusor, sphincter, and DSD give us information. So your dynamic study is also play important role in predicting the development of the disease as well as preventing the renal deterioration of secondary to the bladder dysfunction. Oh, thank you very much. So any question?